recording should do. Yes, I think it'll work. So, 125, chapter 2. All right. All right, this is asset security, and it is pretty short. That's what I thought. Okay, so it's classifying data, ownership, memory and remnants, data destruction, and controls are the topics. Let me see if I can shove this thing out of the way. All right, so you got to classify your government like we talked about, a little more information here. So in government, you have confidential, secret, and top secret. Then there is sensitive but unclassified, where it's not a matter of national security, but it is not a good idea to just let the whole world see it. There's for official use only, which is not supposed to be like published in a newspaper or shared among other agencies and such. And in the private sector, you have things like internal use only. These are possible labels. Then there's sensitive compartmented information. This is information that is supposed to be siloed, so that only people with a need to know can see it, and it's only supposed to be exposed in certain SCI locations that are considered secure enough for this. Things like keyhole and stuff. This is what Snowden dumped a ton of. Top secret SCI information, like active NSA campaigns to hack American companies and foreign adversaries. This is why people freaked out so much. The Snowden revelations, and after that, the Russian hacking tools that they stole from the NSA revealed something that was a cliche in Europe, which is that Americans are idiots and they don't know how to keep a secret. The European spy agencies have been laughing at us as like small children for decades, and apparently quite justly, because we can't keep secrets here. Of course, we have our whole concept of free speech and freedom of movement and civil liberties. Arguably, it's against our culture to keep secrets, but anyway, we are miserable at it. And the agencies that had the highest value secrets just lost them right and left. And I heard from people in the NSA after the Snowden breach that NSA morale plummeted. They said everybody with access to data at the NSA is having to take a polygraph every 3 months, because every top executive is asking, how do you know there is not another Snowden in your staff stealing stuff and planning to leak it? How would you ever know that? And this corporate executive started asking the same thing, and now they're selling software. I saw them trying to sell it, I think, at RSA. They'll sell software that you put on your company network that tells you when your employees have become disloyal, supposedly, by analyzing their network traffic to decide if they're playing more time on games or looking for other jobs, or they seem to have financial problems. Somehow, just by analyzing the corporate data, they'll tell you who's about to betray you. This is not that far from the old witch hunters, where you have someone sniffing to tell you which one of you is the bad person. There's a huge need for that, but I don't think anybody has a way to find the traitors. But anyway, it's a big issue. So, yeah.
But he was a contractor. He wasn't the actual NSA, which made no sense. I'm sorry.
He was a Booz Allen contractor, but they trusted him with data, and he was under contract. He was under non-disclosure agreement, not to reveal it. And so he had access to data that was highly valued, and he totally dumped it, openly violating all the rules. That's why there was a huge argument. Now, a lot of people here think he's a hero, but I know they interviewed people in Britain, and like 90% of the people on the street said that guy should just be shot, because Britain has a strong spy tradition. They understand national security secrets, and they asked the average guy in Britain. The average guy in Britain says, if the government has to read my email to catch terrorists, that's perfectly fine. Doesn't bother me at all. Americans don't have that value. So like I say, we have a strange concept of privacy here. Like I said, the number one issue in privacy in America seems to be hiding your data from the government, not from criminals, which is a little curious to me, but that is the way Americans think. Anyways, it's interesting issues. So compartmented information requires a documented need to know in addition to clearance. You might be cleared for top secret, but you can't see compartmented information unless you also have a need to know it. So clearance is vertical. This determines, I know students who got clearance, I've talked to them about it. I was sort of surprised, it seemed to me like having affairs outside marriage would be a clearance problem, but all my students in the military tell me nobody cares. The only thing they care about is if it's with a foreign national. Cheating on your wife is apparently not a problem. I would think in my world, any guilty secret would be a problem because you can be blackmailed. Like if you ask me, I would say if you're gay, that's not a problem unless you're in the closet. Now it's a problem because now you can be blackmailed. If whatever it is in the open, then you can't be blackmailed, but that's not how it works. It's like a tradition. Macho men are better men because they cheat on their wife. That's just fine. But if it's a foreign national, it's not okay. Anyway, drug addiction, money problems, gambling problems, all these things matter. My students, or many of them, apparently smoke pot like crazy and are very concerned about it. What I've been told is nobody cares if you used to smoke pot. As long as you stopped, it's okay. That's what I've been told. Anyway.
You know that when the CIA was bombed in Lebanon, it was because of an affair.
What's that?
You know when CIA was bombed in Lebanon?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. If you guys remember this,
Yeah.
and it was because the station manager was having an affair with the Hamas.
Yes. So it was. I know. I mean, if you'd ask me, I know. I know the Chicago mob wars in the 20s. Dozens of people were executed because one guy thought his wife was cheating on him. People get really upset about this stuff. I would not blink it. If I was running the security infrastructure, I would say you've got to be faithful to your wife or lose your clearance. But I guess I would be unpopular in military circles. Anyway, they didn't ask me. These are the rules. Maybe there's a good reason for them. Maybe it's just a tradition. Anyway, then you got formal access approval. This is approval from the data owner that you are allowed to see it. And you have to understand the rules and the consequences if the data is lost. This is all supposedly what Snowden agreed to get that information, which he then leaked, and then need to know. Where people are supposed to know what they need to know and avoid learning what they don't need to know. Another related issue I've been told is that if you are briefing the president, you are strictly required to carefully answer only the question you are asked because there is stuff the president is not supposed to know. So he can claim he didn't know about it. Especially Trump, of course, has become very clear. Trump is, of course, making things upside down. Now, just like me at my college, people doing things hide them from Trump because they don't trust him to make a good decision about it. So when they're doing attacks against Russian cyber attacks, they conceal this from the president because he wouldn't let them do it. That's a new level of madness. But in the past, they would conceal information of illegal activities from the president so he can say he didn't know it. Anyway. Here's your security. You got sensitive information requires some protection. Now this means you got to protect it on your servers. You got to protect it at rest, in use, and in transmission. So you got storage. You got to protect your handling of it, your storage and retention. So it has to decide when you're going to destroy it, where you're going to store the backup tapes, and so on. So there's ownership. There's business or mission owners. These are people that senior management that are responsible for the entire process of your company. So they have to make sure that the assets are protected. And they have to solve all the problems. Make sure you hire the right staff, have enough training, have enough money. That's why I say the people at Equifax at this level are guilty if somebody doesn't put a patch on and loses the data. Their job was to make sure that everything was managed well enough. Data owners have a more specific area. They own a certain piece of data, and they're now responsible to make sure that that data is handled in accordance with policy. So whoever was in charge of the credit card numbers and lost them in Equifax, that data owner is also liable. But if the data owner had something else like proprietary PDFs, it would not be their problem that somebody lost the credit card numbers. So they're required to make sure that this data is protected in accordance with the security policy. And they have to determine the sensitivity labels and the handling, like when it's backed up. And then they hand it over to the custodian who actually does all that work. Yeah.
Are these terms spelled out like end user license agreements like, well?
No, not these. Okay, the end user is just one role. The end user is at the bottom, like even below the custodian. The end user has an agreement. And if you read that agreement, it doesn't talk about this because this is all inside Google. All you have is an obligation to only use the software as intended, not reverse engineer it or modify it, not make unauthorized copies and that sort of thing. And if you commit crimes, then it's your fault, not Google's fault. That's what the end user license agreement says. Because your role as the end user is really very limited. You have one copy of the software. You're not allowed to make other copies without getting a license and all that jazz. No, just your own information. So I think the only part of the end user license agreement is if it's proprietary software like Microsoft Windows, then they're telling you you're not allowed to make an extra copy of it and give it to somebody. And if you commit crimes with it or you put your personal data in it and lose it, they're going to make clear they don't take responsibility for that. That kind of thing. That's the end user license agreement. That's typically what I see in there. Although, a fun fact, of course, is nobody reads them. CompUSA about 8 years ago had a end user license agreement for people who used their online PC doctor tool, and they put on page 10 of it, if you read this far, we'll pay you $1,000. And it sat there for 9 months before anybody claimed the money. Nobody reads those things. And that had become such a problem that some people have gotten off in court on the grounds to say, even though I clicked, I have read and agree, I of course didn't. It's ridiculous to think I would read and agree to that garbage. And they've actually gotten off. So now people are trying to make shorter ones that pop up on the screen because they're having trouble defending in court the statement that you read and really agreed to that. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so the data owner owns the information. They have to make sure that this data is handled correctly. Then there's a system owner that owns the physical system. So that's the hardware, updates, physical security, patching, hardening. Now, again, they're going to pass the actual work down to custodians, but the owner is responsible for making sure the work is done. And the custodian does what they're told to by the owner. They're going to make backups, put on updates, put on sensitivity labels, and so on. They're not deciding the policy. They're just implementing the orders they get from above. And users, here's you at the bottom. After they've done all that inside the company, and you end up here with you are now required to do things. And in a company, you'll have end user license agreements like you shouldn't write down your password or share it with other people and things like that. And you should be made aware of the punishment for doing these things. So a data controller manages sensitive data, and a data processor is like the custodian. They do work with the data in accordance with the policies above them. They're like an outsourced company, like a payroll company. They're processing the data, but they're only using data given to them by the data controller and hopefully abiding by agreements of what they're allowed to do with the data. So organization.
What's the difference between a custodian and a data processor? A custodian could be a data processor.
Yes, I think so. But a custodian is mainly talking about maintaining data, keeping hold of data. Processing is using the data to do something, like data entry and using it to print out things. That's all. But it's a very similar role. So this is why I did a study of Android apps. And I went through the top 10 banks, insurance companies, and stockbrokers, and then I went through the top 400 retailers, and an enormous number of them handle data incorrectly. Something like half of them make an extra copy of your password in the apps folder, either unencrypted or encrypted, but private key encryption, and then they hide the key on the phone. And you can't hide anything in Android because every app is distributed with the source code. So you can't hide something from me. And so what struck me here, and I've been given talks about it, is the bad management. The manager should be in a survey showed 80%, managers say 80% of my time is spent trying to run complicated security software that's supposed to be doing things. And that is a huge problem. This is like the captain of a ship saying, I spend 80% of my time in the engine room with a wrench. That is really bad because not only is the captain not qualified to do that job, there's another job the captain should be doing, which is steering the ship and seeing if we're about to ram into something. And apparently, most security officers are not doing their job. And I can tell it from Android apps. Because, and so apparently, my theory, which has not been proven scientifically, is that managers are ashamed of the fact that they're not technical enough. So when their technical staff comes and daffles them with complicated technical crap, they feel ashamed to let them do what they want. And they shouldn't do that. A manager has a job, and it is really important. It should be, tell me, what did you collect? What data did you collect? Where did you put it? How did you protect it? For example, let's talk about thumbprint readers. Before the modern computers that have thumbprint readers built right into them, there was a USB thumbprint reader that was manufactured by Microsoft and Apple, and you could plug it in the USB port and have a thumbprint reader. And the way it worked was this. Your computer was designed to log in with a password. If you logged in with a thumbprint, it would add a driver, take the thumbprint with USB, and then if it matched the thumbprint, it would then type in your password for you. Now, this product should never have made it past stage 1 of conceptual design, because that means the thumbprint driver has your password in plain text, so it can type it into the machine. Now, computers have not stored password in plain text since MS-DOS. People figured out in 1975 that that is a terrible idea. They store hashed passwords because that file can be stolen. So adding some kind of device that puts an extra plain text copy of your password on the computer is completely unacceptable. And that should have been stopped by management. You said, let's have a nice simple block diagram. How does your product work? Where does it put the secrets? Wait a minute, what's going on here? And Android apps do this, half of them. Make an extra copy of your password and store it on the phone. So if you have 50 apps on your phone, you've got 25 extra copies of your password there for no reason at all. Websites do not store your password on your browser. They store a cookie, which is changed every time it's not equal to your password because people reuse passwords. And somehow Android apps are getting away with this, and I fault the management. The managers should be asking their technical staff, what data did you collect and where did you put it? And they should be able to, they should not be ashamed of the fact that they don't know how to code. They should be asking these simple questions and demanding intelligent answers. Anyway, that's what's supposed to go on here. I remember in the Enron hearings, they went before Congress, and Congress members asked the official of the Enron, wait a minute, what is your company for? If a customer gives you money, what do they get? And they'd have blah, 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 complicated crap. Like if you ask cryptocurrency people the same question, you get blah, 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 we're saving the world. Wait a minute. If you can't answer that question, something is completely bogus here. If I give you money, what do I get? It should be something simple. Anyway, I'll say one more thing. I saw in the book Fear. Fear was supposed to be an anti-Trump polemic. People freaked out and said it proves Trump is no good. I read that book, and I thought the Trump campaign should have paid for that book, because they said he went in and they told him, okay, we have to send more troops to Afghanistan. And he said, why? What are we doing there? When will we win? Oh, we'll never win. Well, when will we be done? Oh, we'll never be done. When can we leave? Well, you can never leave. He said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you have to read this 200 pages of complicated crap. He said, I'm not reading that crap. Tell me, in simple terms, when will we be done and when can we leave? If we're not getting anywhere, we should just leave. And I think he's right. That's what management should be. Don't baffle me with complicated nonsense. Give me a simple explanation. What did you do and what did it accomplish? And what are the risks? You should be able to answer those questions. And they're not complicated technical questions. Anyway, so that's what's going on here. All right, so we got some cahoots about this stuff, 3A. I highly encourage you to be like stubborn, mean managers, asking questions and ignoring complicated answers. There should be a very simple answer. What data did you collect from the customer and where is it? That every company, every product should be able to answer that question, and the answer should be good. Anyway. All right, so you got some people. I think I'll carry on. Don't think we have any remote attendees. Nope. Okay, so 6 is the number. That's what I thought. Like 100 people said they wanted to take this class. I said, yeah, I can believe that. I'm not so sure. Anyway, they thought somebody else should take it. That's what they thought. Anyway, so what data requires need to know in addition to clearance? Sensitive compartmented information. This reminds me, by the way, of an issue of traffic control. Studies show that everyone thinks that someone else should take the bus. Anyway. Who puts on security patches? That's the custodian. Good. You people learned a lot better than I did. So, who is the manager responsible for ensuring that security patches are applied? All right, I would have thought maybe the system owner, by the way, I should mention this feeling of being ripped off that you have, get used to it. This is the CISSP. Many of the questions are like this. It could be this, it could be that, I don't really know. They're all like seeing through fog. That's why you really need the practice test. I know you could make many arguments here, and that's why it's not like a CompTIA exam where there's a net plus question and there's just the right answer and the rest are wrong. Very often it's shades of gray. This one is like 70% right, these are only 50% right. That's the way it is. And you sort of get used to it after you do enough practice tests. At first, it seems very unfair. This is a very cruel test. So HR people, what category are they in? All right, I guess I can see that. Yeah, they control a certain kind of data. They're not necessarily the processors, that could be outsourced, but they're responsible for a certain part of the data. Yeah. All right. Well, this reminds me sort of like CCDC. It might be manifestly unfair, but at least it's the same for everyone. So. Jane is 18, good, all right. Well, there's another section of this stuff. We're at 2:30. We go till what, 4? What's that? I don't really, yeah, 4 sounds good. All right. I never could. 4:30. 4:30 is when the bus takes off, I think. So you got to be out of here by 4. Okay. Yeah. So, and I think 4 is reasonable. We're only got one more section to finish. Now, you guys want to finish this section now or take a break and then finish? That's fine. Go, go, go. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're a little bit ahead of time, which I didn't know quite how fast this is going to go. It depends on how many people there are. All right. Wait, not this one yet. Oops. First, you have to look at the slide, so you have some pathetic chance of answering the questions. So, all right. So memory and remnants. We talked about this. So remnants is data that's left over on something when you're done using it. This is a huge problem. It's basically there from technical efficiency. Hard drives, magnetic hard drives are the worst offender. When you store data on a magnetic hard drive and then you delete it, it doesn't bother to erase the data. It just marks those blocks available and the data is still sitting there. Now that is because it would require extra time and power and effort to erase it. So hard drives do not by default bother to make them faster. Now you could make them erase the data. You can install software like steganography, which then it will automatically erase everything when you delete it. That could certainly be done. It would just make your machine run a little slower and it might be worth it. SSDs, by the way, SSDs have a problem that erasing is very slow. So if you left the old data on there, it would really cut down writes. So SSDs, when you delete data, it marks it eligible for deletion. And then when you're not using it, in the background, there's a garbage collection process that tries to find data that's not necessary and erase it. So that block will be empty for later. So in practice, SSDs pretty much lose data when you delete it. Not a 100%, but about 90 or 99% of it is automatically vanished. However, the garbage collection only works on some SSDs and some operating systems. I did some presentations about this at DEF CON. I found a Corsair was fun. You could actually write data, delete it, and then watch, and 13 seconds later it vanishes. But on other ones, it's like a hard drive. It stays there anyway. So anyway, there's some data left on a machine. There you've deleted data, and this happens to a lot of things. By the way, flash drives, thumb drives, I had a bag of them in my office. I think it's still there from like 8 years ago. The cops were picking them up off the ground. They wanted to use them, and they gave it to me, and I gave them to my CISSP students, and I said, find out how to erase them. And for years of work, we figured out there is no way to erase them. Here's a huge, yes. And by the way, you can't erase hard drives anymore either. Here's a problem which is so nasty, it's not in the textbooks. This is from Personal Communications from Travis Goodspeed, who does this. See, if you have SSDs, if you buy like a 100 gigabyte SSD, SSDs have a fairly high failure rate. So they don't give you 100 gigabytes. They give you extra, like 105 gigabytes. And the controller, if it finds an error in one block, it will take it away and replace it with one of the spare blocks. So when your computer is writing to what it thinks is block 10,000, it's not really writing to block 10,000. It's writing to some other block that's been swapped in. And the block that was marked errored contains a lot of old data that has not been erased and can't be erased. It just has one bit that's wrong in it or something. And so if you try to erase it by writing over every block, you can't. Some of the blocks have been removed from the map, and there is no way to map directly to the real physical hardware. So you can't erase an SSD at all. With any computer program, the only thing you could do is physically destroy it, which is highly recommended. Or you could take the chips off and erase them one by one with a different electrical connection, or, which is what forensic people do, chip off forensics, or you could hack the firmware and replace the firmware on the board with one that no longer does this mapping. So when I try to write on block 10,000, I'm really writing on block 10,000. And that's what Travis Goodspeed does. He reverse engineers firmware and hacking. He told me the same thing is now true of magnetic hard drives. Now that they moved above 500 gigabytes, magnetic hard drives have enough failures that they've begun to do the same thing. Your 1 terabyte hard drive has some extra blocks. And as blocks fail, the other ones are silently swapped in, and your computer does not know this has happened. So when you write your computer to erase every block on the hard drive, it can't reach them all. And he said he was able to recover 50 megabytes of good data from a forensically erased 1 terabyte hard drive by hacking the firmware to get back to a one-to-one mapping so you could actually dump the data off the hard drive. So this is an interesting issue, and there are many others like it. Remnants is actually a huge problem. Now, of course, the original problem was people didn't know that deleted files on hard drives are still there, so everybody would just find everything just intact on the hard drive, and this affected, one of the big scandals was Xerox machines. Xerox machines had hard drives, and they just had extra copies of all the documents being copied, and people would rent them. Another thing happened to Amazon Web Services. When the first generation of Amazon Web Services came out, within the first year, a security expert rented an Amazon machine and then ran a forensic tool, and he found the last customer's data just sitting on the drive. Amazon was not wiping the drives between one customer and the next. They fixed that. But this is why I had a Linux friend who writes Linux security books, and he actually developed an awesome technique. He said, suppose you have a cloud server at Amazon or Google or something, and you use it, and now you're done with it. You would really like to wipe it, rather than just send it back to the company and trust them to wipe it. How do you know that happened? It'd be better to wipe it and know it's wiped. So he figured out how to do this in Linux, which I thought was pretty awesome. You're running an operating system booting from the hard drive, or SSD in the case of cloud servers. You can copy into RAM, and you can run the system from RAM, so it's not using the hard drive as a system volume anymore. You can put an SSH daemon and a telnet daemon in RAM, so you have 2 network connections to control it. Now you can erase the SSD completely and then read it to verify it's erased and know it's all gone, and then disconnect from RAM. He wrote the technique to do all that and published it in a Linux magazine. I thought that is pretty awesome. That's what you really should be doing, rather than trusting some cloud provider. Now, there are other systems like iPhones. I mentioned iPhones are probably the most secure system in the world. iPhones and iPads, they're fantastic. And one of the many great things about them is ever since the 3S, iPhones have everything encrypted by default. This is the way to do it. If you store data on an SSD, you can never clean it off because of the swapping. Some of that data goes in blocks that are later determined to be bad and swapped out, so no write process can ever reach them. So if you use an iPhone or an Android phone that's not encrypted, and most of them are not, you can never clean it off. You just have to physically grind up that phone. But iPhones have encryption turned on from the very start. So everything you save from the very beginning is all encrypted. And when you hit factory reset, it just deletes the key. This is an instantaneous process, and it is incredibly efficient. A forensic company a few years ago bought 100 iPhones, and they tried to steal data off them. They could not get any usable data off any of the iPhones. It is extremely effective. Now, what it means, of course, is it takes a little longer to write and a little more battery to write, because it has to encrypt everything, but they've made it efficient so you don't even notice that, and it's pretty brilliant. Android phones can do the same thing, but only if you get a modern version of Android, modern hardware that has this stuff turned on. If you get a cheap one, this stuff is not turned on, and most of them are the cheap ones. Anyway, yeah.
So when you buy, like, nowadays, if you buy Dell or whatever,
Yeah.
they throw all the crap,
The crapware.
and there is no way to erase it. But
Oh, there
I
is.
don't know.
whenever I get a commercial machine, I have to wipe the hard drive completely, reinstall Windows myself. That's the only way to make a commercial machine usable. It has been that way for 10 years.
The recent had a malicious thing on it, and I don't know if you heard. And
Many times that's happened, where it's got malware on it. Even if it's not officially malware, the HP backup utility and photo utility is all crap and slows down your. Yeah.
Malware in it
Oh, yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And it became a law.
Yeah, well, you know, here's another fun fact. All that stuff is because of the antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. When they sued under Penfield Jackson with Ashcroft leading it, they sued Microsoft for antitrust because of Windows 98. Microsoft made active desktop, so Windows 98 background could be a web page. They tried to claim they owned the internet, and they were sued for that because they built Internet Explorer into the operating system, and it was not easy to put on Firefox or whatever it was at that time. Firefox's previous thing, Netscape. So they sued, and they accused Microsoft of abuse of monopoly, and they forced them to, from now on, let third-party companies put on 4 categories of software, and those were media players, backup utilities, I think web browsers, and one other thing. And so because of that lawsuit, Microsoft was not allowed to stop people from pre-installing those products, and that's why all the PCs have that crap on them, because the antitrust lawsuit opened that door, and Microsoft cannot stop them from putting that crap on. Apple has never been sued for antitrust because Apple is not the only game in town. Apple's the more expensive luxury product, a small portion of the market. They can't be a monopoly. They say, if you don't like it, go buy Windows. So they don't have to obey any rules. They can say, this is our Mercedes-Benz. We do everything the crazy way, but if you don't like it, get a Chevy. And that's not a monopoly. So they're immune to all this. But in iPhones, they're almost a monopoly, and the App Store is almost a monopoly. That's why they might get punished for that. But for a long time, Apple skated by being the luxury product, with a high profit margin and a small part of the market. So none of these rules apply because nobody has to buy it. Yeah.
So is that why Microsoft has
The K and N, yes, the K and N versions were, yes, the K and N versions were related. The K and N versions of Microsoft Windows were to meet export restrictions because they were determined to have violated copyright law with their media player and some other product. So they had to make a version of the operating system without those specific features. And also because of the export of cryptography rules that I talked about, unfortunately, they had to make export cryptography versions of Windows. This has turned out to be a disaster. So the versions of Windows that were sent to foreign countries on the bad list had to be weakened in encryption. So they had to use horrible things like 40-bit encryption, which is trivial to crack, because it was illegal to export strong encryption. So that means if you put up a web page and you want to make it visible to people in Korea, you have to support old, broken, weak encryption. So there's a whole bunch of attacks now that involve altering the network traffic to make the website think that you're using the K version, and now I can totally crack in. That's why once you start forcing someone to lower a security boundary, it has unexpected consequences. And this is why the cryptographers are very much against these export restrictions. If you force part of the world to be insecure, you've made a hole that the bad guys can sneak in through. It's, from a mathematical security point of view, it's not a good idea. But it is something that the American records and movie industry demanded because they were so mad about China just pirating everything and apparently having no punishment at all. So they had to do something to make it look like they had punched China for this. It's like our sanctions against Iran. You have to appear to have done something, even if you do something stupid or counterproductive. Now you can say you did something. Anyway, so these RAM forgets when you turn off the power, although it is not instantaneous. It can take up to 10 minutes for RAM to forget, and even longer if you cool it. So there's an attack where you freeze RAM and steal the secrets out of it. That's how you break through BitLocker hard drive encryption. It's the Stanford cold boot attack.
What does that freezing actually do?
It slows down the decay of the bits. So if you chill it like to 50 degrees below zero or something, it will actually retain the data for 15 minutes or half an hour. So you can take it out and put it in another machine and read it. So RAM does not forget instantly like I thought. It fades, but it doesn't forget right away.
So what is it, physically freezing it?
Yes. Yes, the Stanford, I don't know if I got it in the slides. Let me bring it up. The Stanford cold, you got plenty of time. This is an awesome thing. Stanford cold boot attack. This is how you break BitLocker encryption. You haven't seen this, you should. Lest we remember, there you go. And there should be a video, lest we remember. It's like a 3-minute video. It's probably worth seeing if you haven't seen it. YouTube. All right. There used to be a fun video. I don't know if I can find it. I'm going to go back to that original one without the YouTube and see if they got it there. They made a nice video. Maybe it wasn't on YouTube. There we are. This is the page. Full research paper, blog post. Try to blog post. Paper site. Now, so there's a fun video I'd play it if I could find it, but maybe they took it down. It's from 2008. It's getting to be a little bit old, but
It's there.
you found it? You found it? Yeah, I thought it was a little YouTube video. It was definitely a video I saw that was awesome, but I can't find it. Thought it was just on YouTube, but yeah, there, I think I finally found it. Yeah, that's it. Should be sound. Why is there no sound? Yeah, this is the one with Jacob Applebaum. A very controversial.
Even if you've never heard of it, chances are disk encryption is used to protect your private data. You may have seen headlines about stolen laptops containing social security numbers, bank account information, and other personal data. Disk encryption is becoming an increasingly common method to protect against this data theft. Disk encryption scrambles the contents of your hard drive, making them unreadable without an encryption key. Windows Vista, Mac OS X, and Linux all provide disk encryption features. Unfortunately, we have found new attacks that can defeat most disk encryption products if an attacker gains physical access to the computer. These attacks are surprisingly practical, typically taking only a few minutes. They require no exotic supplies or equipment. In most cases, the computer must be on or in sleep mode, but some disk encryption products are vulnerable even if the computer is completely off. If an encrypted computer is stolen, or even if it's just left unattended for a short time, a thief can use our attacks to find the disk encryption keys and unscramble the data. Our attacks exploit a little-known property of computer RAM, the memory where data is stored while it is being used. What happens to data in a computer's RAM when the power goes out? Most people, even many experts, will tell you that it's erased. But the truth is more complex. The data stored in RAM fades away gradually over a period of seconds to minutes. In most computers, we can read what's left by booting a simple startup program. We loaded this image into RAM. Here's what happens after we cut the power. The bits fade gradually and in a predictable way. In this case, the final pattern is a series of horizontal bars. Different memory chips fade at different rates, but most take seconds to fade. We can make them fade more slowly by cooling the chips before cutting power. When we hold this common duster spray can upside down, very cold liquid comes out, cooling the RAM to around -50°C. Once it has been cooled, we can even remove the RAM from the computer without disrupting the contents. Here's what happens if we keep the chips cold. Even after 10 minutes, very few bits have faded, and we can even use a different computer to read them. With brief physical access to a computer, these techniques can be used to make a near-perfect copy of memory as it existed before power was cut. Now, back to disk encryption. The computer needs to know the secret key in order to access the disk. When the computer starts, the user normally enters a password to unlock the key. But afterwards, for as long as the computer is running, the key resides in RAM. If a thief accesses the computer and makes a copy of the RAM, he can extract the key and break the encryption even without knowing any passwords. We've created a demonstration attack that defeats the BitLocker disk encryption feature included in some versions of Windows Vista. Our attack is completely automatic. We start with the Windows Vista laptop. The computer is locked, so we normally can't access the disk without a user's password. However, since Windows is running, the disk encryption key must be stored in the computer's RAM. All we need to do is attach an external hard disk or USB memory stick containing our attack software. Then we cut power to the machine by removing its battery. Then we quickly reconnect the battery and turn it back on. On this computer, the memory fades slowly enough that we don't need to cool the memory chips. We've also developed software techniques for correcting errors in the recovered memory even without cooling it. The computer boots from the external hard disk and runs our attack software, which we call Bit Unlocker. First, the software loads a small program that makes a copy of everything in memory. This captures most of the data that was present in RAM when we cut the power. Now, our program has all the time it needs to analyze the data. Next, our attack program searches the recovered memory for secret keys. After finding the keys, we can decrypt the computer's hard disk and access the files. The entire process takes only a few minutes. Whether your computer is at risk depends on what kind of disk encryption you use and what mode your computer is in when an attacker accesses it. Most disk encryption systems can be defeated if the computer is stolen or accessed when it is in sleep mode or at a password-protected screensaver. Windows Vista's BitLocker is also sometimes vulnerable even when the computer is completely off. If a computer running Vista normally starts up to the Windows login or password prompt, it's vulnerable when it's off. If it starts with the black BitLocker pre-boot password screen, it's safe unless it's stolen after you enter this password. Many other disk encryption products are probably vulnerable. We have tested attacks against TrueCrypt and against Apple's FileVault and Linux's DMCrypt. We believe most similar products are also at risk. Visit our website or check with the maker of your disk encryption software to find out how to.
Well, that's a good one if you haven't seen that one. That really is part of the big things that made everyone aware of this problem. There is leftover data in the RAM and on the hard drive. So now the cache memory is special memory on the CPU chip that's used to be really fast, and that fades pretty fast. There's also registers that are part of the CPU. These are places where data is stored. RAM is volatile in the sense that when you cut the power, it does forget, although it is not as fast and complete as I used to think it was. And that's the cold boot attack that we talked about here. So DRAM, SRAM is fast and expensive. DRAM is slower and cheaper. It's dynamic. You have to keep refreshing the data. Firmware is the data, the part of the software that doesn't change very often, and especially in Internet of Things devices. You have a lot of firmware. This is stored in ROM chips. Now, originally, the ROM chips were burned once at the factory and could never be replaced, and that was PROM, where if you wanted to upgrade the ROM, you had to throw it away and replace the hardware. Now we have field programmable devices, EEPROM and EEPROM and flash memory, all remember with no power, and they can be altered later. So the USB thumb drives are EEPROM. They're written by sectors and slower than magnetic disks, but faster than EEPROMs. SSDs are the new hotness. Everybody's using them. All phones use them, and most modern laptops. They're much faster and nicer than hard drives. But as I say, there's a problem. The blocks are virtual. The computer does not know the physical location of data it's writing, so your computer cannot erase it because it cannot address every sector and write on top of it. However, if your computer supports garbage collection, then that will get most of it, although you cannot guarantee the garbage collection will get it all. So if you want to erase an SSD, or for that matter, a modern large hard drive, you're pretty much hosed because you have no access directly to the physical hardware. They often have an erase command, but people I know in the industry have said that those erase commands often fail because just like the cloud server, you issue the erase command, you have no way to verify it worked. And often they don't work. So it's a problem. So there's two ways to securely erase an SSD. One is to just physically grind up the drive. And this is highly recommended because there have been so many cases where people thought something is erased and it's not, that where the police and evidence lockers and most companies, that's why companies don't donate laptops to schools anymore. It's really an unjustifiable risk. There is no way to be sure there's no data left on that thing. And if you want to live up to your compliance regulations and your partnerships where you promise not to lose the data, you can't be given that machine to somebody else to use. It is an amateur move, like telling somebody about their vulnerabilities. It shows failure to think on a big scale. Anyway, so the other thing, of course, is what Apple does. Turn on encryption before you ever start using it at all. Before you type in any data or any passwords or anything, have encryption turned on. Now, when you're tired of it, erase the key. That will do it, as long as the encryption is strong, and strong, fast encryption is readily available. We have AES, which is very good. So if you encrypt it with AES and then you delete the key, that should really work very well. And in practice, it works very well for iPhones. So that is probably the best procedure. And it's kind of a sin and a shame that most laptops don't encrypt the hard drive all the time. They really should. All phones and laptops and everything should be encrypting the hard drive all the time for this reason, among others. But still they don't, most of them. Anyway, then there's data destruction. So suppose, even if you're not losing the data by accident, there comes a time when you're done with the data and you'd like to get rid of it because you decide to keep it for 3 years or 7 years, and there comes a time when you want to get rid of it. Now, deleting a file doesn't get rid of it. You have to write on top of the sectors. This is called shredding or wiping. A single pass is enough if you can hit every sector, but there's this thing called DoD boot in the hacking library for 15 passes. There's no logical justification for that. That was to address a problem from 20 years ago. Before PATA and SATA hard drives, there was an issue of sectors not lining up right. You had to do multiple passes. That hasn't been true of any hard drive in use for 20 years. One pass is enough if you can really write to every sector. One pass writing zeros, all that data is gone. The problem is, with modern hard drives, you can't really write to every sector. But that is not common knowledge. I'm not even sure that's been ever officially published. Travis Goodspeed told me, and I asked him to write it up, but he got distracted by hacking other things. And I'm not sure there's even a published paper about that. I think very few people know this. It's very hard to recover. You can't plug in a forensic tool and get that data. You have to hack the firmware, which is what he does, but normal people are not ready to do that. So degaussing is something I've heard about. I've never seen anybody do it on a real modern hard drive where you just use some kind of magnetic field and wipe it out. I'm highly skeptical because as the bits get smaller and smaller, the magnetic field required to read and write them gets higher and higher. And magnetic fields fall as the cube of the distance. And the read-write head is only a micron above the drive. So I highly doubt that anybody outside of a nuclear particle accelerator has a magnet strong enough to really scramble that drive. But I don't know. Some people claim they can do this. I would doubt it with a modern hard drive. Then there's physical destruction. Just grind up the drive, smash it with a hammer, run it through a wood chipper. I've seen people microwave them and you get sparks. I doubt it. There was a contest at DEF CON where they took CDs and smashed them, or floppies and smashed them, and tried to put together. And my students did this. They took a hard drive and scraped it up and tried to recover some data. They got some data off it. I think you could do it. If you microwave it, I don't think it would get all of it. This thing, he tried scraping on it with like a can opener and make some X's, and you could still get some data off. It's if you scraped all the metallic stuff off, you'd probably be fine. By the way, Drive Savers is the data recovery company, which is a lot of money in that. And it went and toured them, and they have hard drives that have been through a fire, that have been through a car wreck, that have been buried in a stream for years, and they can get data off all of them. That's their job. It's hard to get the data off a drive and be sure it's gone. All right, so I got last cahoots here. Yeah, I think that'll do for today. We're far enough. And this stuff does have a tendency to put you asleep, so I think they won't fire me for letting you out early. All right, I guess that's it. Oh, good. Now we have the right number of Cahooters. Okay. I thought we might have an abstainer. There's often a Kahoot abstainer. So, which component retains data longer when cooled? Okay, RAM is what we know. I wouldn't be surprised if registers and cache also technically do, but the point where it's really an issue is the RAM. What device can only be written once? That's PROM. You can program it once, and that's it. Which device has garbage collection? Okay, those are SSDs. And if you're going to discard an unencrypted SSD, how do you clean the data? Physical destruction is the only way to be sure it's gone. And of course, an issue here is, even though I know some people would say on drives, oh, it doesn't really matter, there's not enough there to worry about. In practice, that might be true, but suppose you have a compliance regulation where you have to sign an agreement and say, we made sure that no unauthorized people saw that medical data. If you have a practice like this, where some of that data could in principle still be left on you, you violated your contract. So that's why physically destroying it is the wisest procedure. All right, and Robert is 15, okay. So I guess that's it. I'll just see you tomorrow. What time is it tomorrow, 9? 8:30, I'm kind of, 9:30? 9, okay, 9 tomorrow, okay. I'll be here at 9 tomorrow, okay. Okay, good, I'm glad you, okay, 9 o'clock tomorrow, okay. So that's it. I'll stick around for a while if anybody wants to ask any questions or anything, but we've covered enough for one day. Too much of this stuff, you fall asleep. All right.